So adventuring can be long and lonely, and who wouldn't want a cute little flying kitten, or maybe a squirrel, or maybe a frog to curl up with at night? My name is Don. I'm trying to be the sly strategist, and let's go ahead and get into familiars. So familiars are a ability or a little pocket friend that you can get based on classes or through certain archetypes and class feats. For example, a wizard or a witch might get one. You can also use the familial master archetype in order to get a familiar. And it is one of my favorite archetypes that I like to play with, simply because they can do a lot while not being a combat force. So with that kind of in mind, let's go ahead and cover the really basics first before we can get into some of the other more ticky-tacky things that are involved with a familiar. So a familiar is a tiny creature that is mystically bonding to you. It doesn't matter whether your familiar is a bear. It doesn't matter whether your familiar is a mouse. It doesn't matter whether your familiar is a dragon. For the purposes of the game, the familiar is a tiny creature. It is gained through class feats or the familiar master archetype. The stat blocks, and this is really important. It's really important. Actually, there's two big, high, bold letter bullet point things, but we'll cover this first one here, is the stat block for a monster is not the stat block for your familiar. Every single familiar has the same stat block based on you, the master. So if you have a badger that you look up in the bestiary and you see their stat blocks and you see all the cool things they can do, or you see a dragon and you see all the cool things they can do, that does not mean that your familiar will have those same capabilities. If you choose an owl and you see an owl can fly, fantastic. You have to select that every single day. And that is one of your familiar abilities that they have that you just kind of can't get rid of. So keep that in mind. Don't think that your familiar is the creature that you are projecting it to be. It is the same for everyone. And with that in mind, the familiar rules are in the core rule book on pages 217, 218. Archives of Nethys, another great place to look at it. There are tons of videos on YouTube here about familiars and how to build familiars. So I'm not going to go too far into it, but we're going to cover, well, in truth, there's not that much to go into because they're all kind of the same, but there are tons of resources for you. So if you would like to go a little bit further into it, please research and, do some more digging and you're going to find what you're looking for. But on page 217, 218. So the familiar's hit points is always 5 times the master's level. So if you were to get a familiar at level 1 due to some class feat, then that familiar would have 5 hit points. If you get the familiar or master archetype at level 2, then that familiar is going to have 10 hit points. No more, no less, no modifiers, nothing else is added to that. They just get 5 times your level. That's their stat block. Once again, doesn't matter whether it's a squirrel or a dragon, it is going to have 5 hit points times the master's level. There are no stat blocks simply because it is a reflection of the owner. That is what a familiar is. It's the bond between the master and the familiar. That's where their stats come from. They are all size tiny, like we mentioned a little bit earlier. Saves and modifiers and AC are equal to the owners before you do the circumstance or status bonuses and penalties. By circumstance, what I mean by that is a good example. Let's say I have an AC of 15 and I take cover. That take cover is going to give me a +2 circumstance bonus. That +2 does not transfer to my minion unless the minion's action is also to take cover. hopefully that makes sense for the circumstance bonus. Also, it doesn't benefit from item bonuses or runes necessarily. So if you have specific barding made for your familiar, for some reason, that bonus on that barding actually doesn't do anything for the familiar. So just keep that in mind. It might be nice to make a nice little special tabard or something that you can have on your bunny's ears or something, but it really won't do much for the familiar. All this is going to tie into that big, bold, next bold bullet point. But the things that are specifically denoted in pages 217, 218 are your perception, acrobatics, and stealth, and how that works. And I do have some calculations I'm going to actually put on the screen over here, but I have some little notes that I'll be referring to. But it is not the main ability score. It's very specific. So I'm going to do a second level cleric who did the familiar master archetype very specifically. And we're going to do the perception. So a cleric, normally you'd want them to have 18 wisdom. So they're going to have the +4. That is their spellcasting modifier. Spellcasting modifier is important for the familiar. That second level cleric itself would have a perception of +8. That would be its modifier. That +8 does not transfer to the familiar, however. The +8 is the wisdom, which is +4, proficiency because they're trained of a +2, and a +2 for their level. So that would give them the 8. Now the familiar would only have a +6. The reason why it would have a +6 is because it would still get that spellcasting modifier, which for a cleric is wisdom, of a +4 plus level, which is +2. It does not get the trained +2 or expert or master or whatever. It just gets the spellcasting modifier plus level. Now, and where it wouldn't matter is acrobatics. Let's say you had in a specific case, and the one I'm going to do here, let's say you had a cleric that you just gave it a +2 to dex. So that cleric just has a 14. So if we're doing acrobatics, the cleric would have an acrobatic score of 6. So it'd be a +6 for its modifier because its dex is a +2, plus it's proficient, means it's trained of a +2, and level +2, giving it a 6. The familiar would also have a +6 for totally different reasons. It would have a +6 because of the wisdom, which is the spellcasting modifier, and the level. I know it seems a bit, but it's only for 3. Once again, that same thing would apply to stealth because it would be dex. For the cleric, for the second level cleric, it would be dex plus trained proficiency of +2 plus a +2 for level, whereas the familiar would just have the wisdom modifier of +4 plus level, which would be +6. So it's only for those 3. Those are the only ones you have to worry about. All other skills and attack bonuses are equal to the master's level. Something else to consider for your basic building of a familiar is they either have, by default, a land speed of +25 or a swim speed of +25. You get to choose. There is a familiar ability called amphibious. So if you chose a swim of 25, let's say you had a fish. If you chose a swim of +25, you could give it a land speed of +25 by choosing the amphibious familiar trait, and vice versa. If you are choosing an owl, raven, bat, something along those lines, you can choose a familiar ability of flyer, which will give you a flying speed of +25. And it is assumed that you will do that every single day. So every morning you get to choose 2 at second level. You can pick other feats that will expand those out to 4. It is called the Enhanced Familiar feat, which will expand it out to 4. But it is assumed that you will pick flying every single day if you have a flying familiar. Same thing, climbing if you have a climbing, or burrow if you chose the badger. You will choose burrow every single morning. All familiars have low light vision regardless of what you choose. If you chose a bat because you thought innately they would have dark vision, that's not true. It has the same vision as a squirrel or a bunny would, for all that matters. They all have low light vision. However, you can choose dark vision as an ability. It can, by default, communicate with you through emotions, as long as they are within 1 mile of you. This is not speech. It doesn't understand languages. It can't communicate language. Although you can choose speech as a familiar ability, so keep that in mind if you're going to use your creature as a scout. However, you would think of it this way. If you chose your bunny rabbit to scout ahead, you're in a dungeon and it's going down the tunnel. It sees 4 kobolds ahead. What it will feel is fright, and what you as the master will feel is fright. That bunny rabbit isn't going to say, there's 4 kobolds. It doesn't understand Draconic. It doesn't know what a kobold is, and it can't speak. But it'll feel afraid, and that is what it will transfer to the master. So you can choose language. Let's see, what's it called? It's actually called speech. The familiar ability is actually called speech. So you can choose that, but that would be something you'd have to choose. This is the other big, bold, huge topic thing I want to say is familiars in combat. As you might guess from my talking about the stat block above and saying that they don't have a stat block, familiars are not really intended to be used in combat. If you want a combat buddy, then what you really want is an animal companion rather than a familiar. Or a minion, although technically a familiar is a minion, and we're going to get into that too. But you really want an animal companion. Familiars aren't necessarily used in combat. That is all going to be up to your GM, whether they want to allow you to use a familiar for aid. There are some things that a familiar can do in combat. Specifically, there are master abilities that give them the ability to do things. So they have an attack bonus, and that's mainly used for the spell delivery master ability. Let's say if you had Chill Touch. We'll go back to our cleric. You had Chill Touch, which is available by touch. What you could do as a cleric is spend your 2 actions casting Chill Touch and then command your familiar, who you gave the delivery master ability at the beginning of the day, 2 actions to go up to a monster, tap it, and do the Chill Touch for you. That could be the delivery mechanism for your Chill Touch. And since it is a creature that doesn't want to be chill touched, it has an attack modifier. But can a squirrel or even a bear familiar strike? No, they don't have that ability in combat. Once again, you want an animal companion, which is a totally different thing, not a familiar. You can leave it up to the GM can decide how they want to handle things like giving aid or dropping rocks on a monster's head or pebbles for distraction. But in general, a dragon familiar and a squirrel familiar are the exact same thing. So keep that in mind. I don't suggest you try to use them in combat. They don't have very many hit points. Their AC is going to be horrible. And once you use them in combat, your GM can do open season on all familiars. So just be careful. Familiar and master abilities. I won't go into each and every single one, although I'll highlight a few here and there. Every single day, and we'll start at the beginning here with not the enhanced familiar, but the regular familiar. You'll have 2 abilities you can select every morning, and they can change every morning. And it does not matter the type of familiar you have as to what you can choose, unless it is part of that character's or part of that familiar's identity to fly. Then you need to select fly every single time. But if you want a talking squirrel, choose it. But every single day you are going to choose 2 abilities. It can be 2 familiar abilities. It can be 2 master abilities. It could be 1 of each. It doesn't matter, but they can choose 2 every single day. And those are the ones they have. If you do select the enhanced familiar, they'll have up to 4. You can change these every single day. They don't have to be the same. You can decide, well, we spent this whole day in the dungeon. We're going to be in another day. We're going to take a rest. I guess I want him to be able to speak to me as opposed to a flyer, because I'm not going to need that today because we're in a cramped little dungeon. So you can change it so you're not nailed down to what you want. The familiar abilities are about characteristics of the familiar. Flying, speech, dark vision, those are characteristics of the familiar itself. Master abilities are utility for the familiar, or what the familiar does for you as a master. Be it lifelink or familiar focus to give you back a focus points. Extra reagents to give you reagents. Spell delivery, as we mentioned before, to be the conduit for touch spells. So these are things you want to pick each and every single morning, depending on what you're doing throughout the day. Super handy, doesn't tie you down. And the thing I like about this and what we've kind of covered before, I'll state it again, a dragon familiar and a squirrel familiar are the exact same thing, is don't let the fact that you want a flyer limit your role-playing abilities. If you want a flying squirrel or a flying kitten, then make it. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. And the next day, it could be a talking kitten as opposed to a flying kitten. It's limited by what you want to do and what you want to role-play. So, man, I love the role-play in Pathfinder 2nd edition. So do that. The very last thing I'm going to cover here is, and it's a tough one to actually say because it's not actually spelled out in 217, 218, but familiars are minions. In doing that, I'm going to put it basically on the screen here, what the definition is, and I'm going to read it myself right now to you as it's sitting up here, because there's one aspect of it that's pretty important. So here it is. Minions are creatures that directly serve another creature. A creature with this trait can only use 2 actions per turn, doesn't have reactions, and can't act when it's not your turn. So in the initiative order, your familiar is on your initiative. Your minion acts on your turn in combat once per turn when you spend an action to issue it commands. For an animal companion, you command an animal. This is not an animal companion, this is a familiar. For a minion, that's a spell or magic item effect, like a summon minion. You sustain a spell or sustain an activation if not otherwise specified. You issue a verbal command as a single action with auditory and concentrate traits. That's what we're doing with a familiar. If given no commands, here's the important thing, or the change up. If given no commands, minions use no actions except to defend themselves or to escape obvious harm. This is at the GM's discretion. If left unattended for long enough, typically 1 minute, mindless minions usually don't act. Animals follow their instincts, and sapient minions act how they please. What that means is remember, a minute is about 6 rounds of combat. I'm sorry, a round is 6 seconds, so that's about 10 rounds of combat. Unlikely that you are going to have a combat go that long, but after a minute, if you aren't actively commanding your creature, it can go do animal things. Doesn't mean that it's going to be frightened 4 at the beginning of combat or anything along those lines. However, GM discretion determines what the animal does for movement, getting out of the way, of area effect spells, moving away from attacks. But it also means that you don't have to actively, continually focus on the animal throughout the whole entire combat. It will do normal animal things. When they're saying mindless minions, zombies, skeletons, things like that, if you're a necromancer, and sapient minions, I haven't gotten to that level yet to have a sapient minion. But let's say you have a summoned creature of some sort. That would be what we're talking about there. What we're talking about is a instinctual animal, which is what we have The last particular point in this definition here is a minion can't control other creatures. So if you give the familiar kin speech where it can talk to others, so you have a squirrel and you want it to go in the trees and talk to other squirrels and command the army to rain down acorns upon the monster that is attacking your party. No, because your squirrel can't command other squirrels. That's what that gets into. So we're going to go ahead and kind of close it up with that. I appreciate you guys listening to this video. I hope that if you did get something out of it, you like or subscribe. It always helps to do those kind of things. And I am going to wish you a good day and happy adventuring. Thanks.